guys, welcome back to another video, and this one may be a long one, but we got to talk about this because this was something that everybody was talking about last week with the EU stuff, and it was this poster here, Microsoft showing the market shares between PlayStation and Xbox and showing how dominant PlayStation is, saying that they have 80% whereas Xbox has 20%. But the question everybody was asking was, where was Nintendo? Why did they leave Nintendo out? Are they misleading people? Are they misrepresenting the facts with their arguments? Now, the big thing everybody who saw this and have been following this case have said right away was that this was an argument that was presented based off of the way that Sony had framed it. They are the ones that wanted to focus only on Xbox and PlayStation. They're the ones that kept Nintendo out of the loop, pretty much saying that they don't compete on the same level because of the console itself, because it's a less powerful console, the market that they deal with, more family friendly, all of that type of stuff. So Microsoft seemingly was just responding to what the regulators were looking for, what picture had been framed from all of the previous documents that had come out and from all of the arguments that had come out from PlayStation in terms of trying to block this deal. So we'll talk about this because there's a really good thread here going over all the things within the CMA's decision, which was their provisional findings, which this upcoming week they're going to have their hearings for the provisional findings, which I think will be very interesting. A lot of stuff is going to come out of that. But they talk about Nintendo, they talk about PlayStation, they talk about Sony and the market itself. So it's a pretty long thread, but we'll go through it. Again, this is from Derek Strickland from Tweaktown, who put this thread together, and it's really well done. I'll have it linked in the description below. But this says Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, the parties. So when we're reading through this stuff, the parties will be Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, actually argue that Nintendo should not be dismissed from regulators' definitions of the console market due to its family-friendly games. So Microsoft and Activision are actually arguing against dismissing Nintendo, which is a big thing to take into account, because people, again, were looking at this and saying that Microsoft was misrepresenting the facts with this part of the argument when they were actually the ones here arguing to not leave Nintendo out. So this is 157 in the CMA provisional findings. The parties submitted that Nintendo has built a successful console business without a single version of Call of Duty being available on Nintendo Switch. The parties stated that the overall quality and appeal of a platform are more important than any game. The parties submitted that Nintendo cannot be dismissed as competing less closely with Xbox and PlayStation on the basis that it offers different types of games that are marketed to a different audience. Example, family-friendly games, because there are several paths that a console platform can take without relying on a particular game franchise or genre, and Nintendo offers games across genres. And it's an interesting quote, because that's one of the main things that PlayStation has been really saying throughout this entire thing, why they want to block this deal, is that they believe that Call of Duty alone gives Microsoft enough power to go out and foreclose PlayStation, and that they won't be able to compete just because of that one game. If they don't have that one game on their platform, they're not going to be able to compete anymore. And we know Call of Duty and PlayStation, they are huge customers to each other. Call of Duty being the biggest game on PlayStation, and PlayStation being Activision's biggest customer in 2020, and one of their biggest customers ever since probably that marketing deal started with PlayStation and Call of Duty. So that's why they're arguing this, because they know it's such a huge revenue stream. But obviously there's proof out there with the Nintendo side of things. You can compete easily without having Call of Duty. You don't need it to survive. And that's an example that Microsoft was trying to bring up there. So we move on here. It says, as per phase 1 decision, the CMA decided to focus their theory of harm on Sony because, number one, the Switch has lower power than the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S, and Nintendo has a different content and audience target. So as noted further below, the CMA considers that Nintendo competes less closely with Xbox as compared to PlayStation by virtue of its differentiated content, target audience, and differential technical capabilities. This theory of harm therefore focuses on Sony. The CMA has considered the ability of the merged entity to harm Sony through a total or partial foreclosure of ABK games, its incentive to do so, and the effect of such strategies on competition. So they don't think that Nintendo, the Switch, is in the same category as the PS5 and the Xbox, because it is a much weaker console. I mean, throughout generations, I mean, you always would think about console competition as the big three: Nintendo versus PlayStation versus Microsoft. Since the OG Xbox came into the fold, that generation specifically, I mean, they were both, all three of them were all competing on similar power, similar styles of games that they were putting out, lots of third-party stuff. In fact, I think the GameCube during that generation was the most powerful console, or it was more powerful than the PlayStation 2 at least. But then when we went to that, but the GameCube after that generation did do as well. So then we went over to the next generation where the Wii really tried to differentiate itself. It really said they didn't want to compete on the same level in terms of specs and all that type of stuff as big, powerful consoles as the PS3 and the Xbox 360. And it came out with the motion controls and really became a family-friendly console. Nintendo's always been family-friendly, but the Wii was, I would say, the beginning, right, where they completely tried to segment off to a different market. They started focusing less on the hardcore gamers. Not to say that they didn't have hardcore games on the Nintendo Wii. There were still tons. I mean, you have the Zeldas, you have the Metroids, great games, but they really focused on like adults, older adults, kids, the motion controls. People literally would buy the Nintendo Wii, play Wii Sports once or a couple times, then never pick up the Wii again. So it was a huge differentiating market that they were looking at. People didn't think about the 360 and the PS3 in the same vein as the Nintendo Wii. So I would say it does kind of make sense when you look at it from that perspective. But with the Nintendo Switch right now, it's hard to like, obviously it's a less powerful console. Obviously it's a different concept, but you can take it in handheld mode and all that type of stuff, but it has great third-party support. It has tons of games that people play on Xbox or on PlayStation. So I would say it's less so much this generation compared to the Wii generation and what they try with the Wii U, which obviously failed. I would say that they do compete a little bit closer, but they look at this as something that they are completely different. Continues on here, it says on a base level, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft operate very similarly. They rely on hardware, software, and services. Nintendo is also a closer competitor to Microsoft in terms of revenues. There's an $8.8 billion annual revenue gap between Xbox and PlayStation. So in 2022, this is kind of surprising to see. They're actually very close with Nintendo. In fact, it looks like 2022, Microsoft made more money in terms of revenues than Nintendo did, and Sony has made the most money. They have the biggest gap between all of the companies, making about $10 billion more in revenue than Microsoft, and then Microsoft's about $3 billion more than Nintendo. But it's true, they all operate similarly right now with consoles, with software, with ecosystem now, even subscription. I mean, Nintendo and PlayStation are much more close, but they do have their online offerings, Nintendo Switch Online, PlayStation Plus, whereas Microsoft is a much more open ecosystem where they're getting revenues from multiple different sources. So they do technically, like I said, this generation, it's much more similar in the way that they do operate. Now, the CMA goes on and talks about some other things here. They say, in general, Microsoft's internal documents track PlayStation more closely than Nintendo, with Nintendo often being absent from any internal competitive assessment. One Microsoft internal document assesses, and that part was cut out. Another Microsoft internal document points to the difference in the technical strategies of Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo consoles. And then the CMA has also received evidence from the parties showing that that part, I guess, was redacted as well. This suggests that Xbox and PlayStation are closer substitutes to each other than the Nintendo Switch. And of course, you look at all three of these consoles right now, they're definitely more closer in substituting each other. It's like, you don't really see too much of the console wars going on between Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox. It's always Xbox versus PlayStation. They came out at the exact same time. They have very similar specs. They have the comparisons between all the third-party games that come out. You rarely see the comparison with the Nintendo Switch thrown in there because there's no point. It's a much weaker console. It came out in 2017. Maybe the next Nintendo will compete far more closely with the current Xbox and the current PlayStation. Even though these consoles are 2 years within to their generation, you can pretty much bet that Nintendo is going to release a console to try to get it in the same price range, probably cheaper than the current consoles, the Xbox and PlayStation, but at least have similar specs because the technology has become cheaper now since the 2 years that the Xbox and PS5 have been out. Now, next part here, they talk about how they formed their decision to focus on Sony for its phase 1 decision. So they say, regarding the merged entities' ability to foreclose Nintendo, third parties confirmed that Microsoft and Sony compete closely in gaming consoles and that Nintendo is not as close as a competitor. One third party explained that Nintendo's business model differs from that of Sony's and Microsoft's, and that Nintendo competes more closely with companies outside of the gaming industry. For example, Nintendo has products such as Wii Fit, which are not traditional games and may compete with fitness apps and other non-game apps. This third party also explained that Nintendo's audience differs from other consoles as its games are marketed as family friendly with less focus on heavy violence and shooting games, example Mario Kart and Super Mario. And this part's kind of interesting because I actually have a real life experience right now when they're speaking specifically about the family friendly stuff in Nintendo and Mario Kart. I literally just bought my dad a Nintendo Switch. He's in his 60s, bought it for him for Christmas, and he's actually playing Mario Kart and having a great time with it. But I couldn't see him right now at his age playing something like AAA on Xbox or PlayStation. But Mario Kart, loving it. So that's where that difference I think is. But there are obviously some 60-year-olds that will play the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S. Goes on here, it says another third-party publisher commented on the technical differences of Nintendo's consoles, noting that they had encountered difficulties when bringing a game to Nintendo Switch, but no difficulty in bringing the game to Xbox or PlayStation. Of course, technical differences, like we're seeing issues. Well, we're not seeing issues, but we're seeing the developers have to go and optimize these games similarly for the PS5 and the Xbox. And sometimes they're not perfect. Like sometimes there's different FPS drops on each console. Some run better on the PS5, some run better on the Xbox, some run great on the Series S, some don't run as great on the Series S, which is weaker than them all. Bringing them over, some of these new games over to the Nintendo Switch would be seemingly impossible and just not something that the developers probably have the resources or time to want to do, depending on the type of game it is. This third party explained that this was because of the different type of hardware that Nintendo offers relative to Xbox and PlayStation. Of course, I mean, that part's common sense. The goal of this thread is to investigate the origins of the regulators removing Nintendo from the market. So yeah, this is explaining what this is all about. He says, the CMA isn't necessarily wrong in its assertion that Nintendo is successful without Call of Duty because of its family-friendly games, but a closer look shows that Nintendo makes disproportionately more from first-party games than it does from third-party titles. And that is something... When we talk about first party stuff, or at least on this channel, when I talk about the first party stuff, and I'm saying first party isn't the way that you make all of your money in gaming. I'm specifically focusing on PlayStation and Xbox because the stats are out there. I think it was like 12%. I don't know if that's the most up-to-date stat, but it was like 12% of PlayStation users actually pick up and play their first-party games. And there's over 100 million plus PlayStations out there with the PS4 and the PS5. So they're making the majority of their money off of third-party titles. And I'm almost positive the numbers are very similar with Xbox. Majority of the money is being made off of third-party. But Nintendo is that anomaly because they have such great brand IP, great brand recognition with like Super Mario and Zelda, Metroid, just all of their first-party stuff. You have the Super Smash Bros, like everything, right? They're different. They make a ton of their revenue off of first party compared to their third party, which that itself I think would be somewhat of a differentiating factor between the three platforms. I would say that shows that Xbox and PlayStation do compete more closely in terms of that need for the third party content, whereas Nintendo could technically survive with little third party content. They would still be able to put out tons of great games and make a ton of money off of just their first party stuff. And I mean, these numbers here are showing their revenue splits between first party and third party. Next up, from the CMA, Call of Duty is currently available on 2 gaming consoles, Xbox and PlayStation. We have provisionally found that these consoles compete closely with each other in terms of content, target audience, and console technology. We have provisionally found that Nintendo's consoles compete less closely with either of Xbox or PlayStation, generally offering consoles with different technical specifications and with its most popular titles tending to be more family and child friendly. Nintendo does not currently offer Call of Duty, and we have seen no evidence to suggest that its consoles would be technically capable of doing so with a similar quality of gameplay as Xbox and PlayStation in the near future. So that's an interesting point there, because we know Xbox made that 10-year deal with Nintendo, and let's say that 10-year deal starts next year for 2024. Are they going to be able to bring over the current Call of Duty on a technical level to the current Nintendo Switch? They will be able to, but they'll have to utilize things, I think, like cloud technology. The actual game itself natively won't be able to come anywhere near what it is on Xbox and on PlayStation, unless maybe Xbox has that news now, has that information from Nintendo, and they're saying, hey, we're bringing out a new Nintendo Switch at the beginning of 2024 or at the whenever near Call of Duty releases in 2024, that they will be ready to get the current version of the game to run similarly to what it is on Xbox and PlayStation. So we'll see what happens with that. I don't think that the 10-year deal starts with the upcoming one in 2023. I mean, maybe it could, because that will make things even more interesting. If they have to bring that one over to Nintendo, they will definitely have to utilize some sort of cloud technology if they are looking at through this. Or the other thing that I thought that they could do, which if the deal goes through, I guess at that point they can still do this, would be bringing over like a Call of Duty mobile style with the same name and the same stuff, just obviously much worse graphics and technical specs to the current ones on Xbox and PlayStation. So the next part is the parties' views, and that's Microsoft, that's Activision Blizzard, talking to the CMA about their views on this entire thing. Microsoft submitted that the suggestion that Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo are not close competitors is incorrect. So that's key right there. All of the talk that was going around that Microsoft was framing the market in a bad way for their own advantage clearly is not correct. They were just reacting to what the regulators had framed, to what Sony had framed in the argument. They even said to the CMA that not including PlayStation is an incorrect claim. You have to include PlayStation there for competition. In relation to Nintendo specifically, Microsoft submitted that Nintendo is a strong competitor in consoles, and the Nintendo Switch is one of the most successful consoles of all time. Microsoft further submitted that while the Nintendo Switch is less powerful than the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, and then the next part is redacted, unfortunately. In response to the suggestion that Nintendo's offering is likely different to other consoles by virtue of its target audience, Microsoft submitted that Nintendo does not just target a family-friendly audience and instead offers a broader range of mature content than Xbox, which are also actively marketed. And I agree with that. I mean, if you look at the Switch now, they have a ton of mature content, tons of third-party support. This isn't the Nintendo Wii U, where it was just carried by all the first-party stuff. And even then, I guess you could use that as an example that they do need third-party because the Wii U completely failed. So there's everything you want to play on the Switch you can get. Like if you want to play M-rated stuff, you can get. You want to play shooters, you want to play action RPGs, you want to play everything. It's there on the Nintendo Switch. Then they say here that Microsoft stated that several of Nintendo Switch's latest exclusives have not been family-friendly games and have received mature ratings. Microsoft also submitted data showing that the distribution of gamers by age on all three consoles is similar, to further substantiate that Nintendo caters to similar audiences as Xbox and PlayStation. So there you go. Good points. I mean, with the audience stuff, with the age stuff, I mean, Nintendo has such a nostalgia factor. You're always going to have people my age picking up Nintendo consoles forever, because of the fact that it's a console you played way back in the day. Was when probably most people's first consoles that they got into, and it's always going to have a special place in people's hearts when it comes to gaming, and it'll go with them throughout their entire life. Now, he says the CMA decided not to further segment the console market, the FTC's high-end console markets. So 5.50 here. Finally, we have considered whether the product market should be further segmented by console type. The party submitted that static consoles and handheld consoles should be considered part of the same market because there is no longer a market distinction between these different types of consoles. And handheld consoles also support technologically advanced games, Nintendo Switch, Valve, Steam Deck. Then they go on and say 5.51, we consider evidence on the similarity between the Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo Switch in the following chapters. The evidence broadly shows that Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo all compete in the console market from a demand-side perspective. They're all used almost exclusively for gaming and enable publishers to offer a variety of games on their hardware. From a supply side, they offer consoles with broadly similar technical specifications and prices that are comparable, particularly Xbox and PlayStation, and to a lesser extent Nintendo. As such, we do not consider it appropriate to further segment by console type. However, whilst we recognize that all gaming consoles exert some competitive constraint on each other, we also consider any differences between the consoles that may make them less substitutable with each other. This is particularly true for Nintendo consoles. The latest Switch consoles are handheld with lower technical specifications, examples in terms of RAM, GPU, memory, and offer content that is more family friendly. This is discussed further in the competitive assessment. And then it goes on here. It says that Microsoft actually told the CMA again that Nintendo is a close competitor, but the CMA came back and said to Microsoft, hey, you guys said this in the Epic versus Apple case to use it against them, using it as a competitor. And the actual quote, they say, for example, Microsoft's vice president of business development for gaming media entertainment in 2021 stated in the US Epic vs. Apple case that the most direct competitor for hardware sales would be the SIE PlayStation. And when asked if there were any others, stated that Nintendo Switch is also a competitor, but to a much lesser extent. So they use that as a counter to Microsoft saying that Nintendo should be considered in this. And I guess one of the main reasons why Microsoft wants this considered is because they signed that 10-year deal and they're showing that they are willing to work with the competitors and not try to go out and foreclose them. They want to bring Call of Duty to the competitors. They want to bring Activision Blizzard games to the competitors. So that's why they really want them to consider the Nintendo Switch. Now, the next section here is the CMA's competitive analysis, examining Nintendo Switch's power and technical limitations, games library, and ownership. Based in parties and third parties evidence, UK regulators were able to determine that Xbox and PlayStation compete more closely with one another. So yeah, I'm not going to read through everything here, but basically they look at the technical specifications of the consoles. And of course, Xbox and PlayStation, they're extremely close to technical specifications. Series X being the most powerful, followed by the PS5 and then the Series S, but they all play the same games. Whether it's a slight reduction in resolution or a slight reduction in frame rates, they're all playing the same stuff. You would take a huge hit on some of these games on Nintendo. I don't even think it would be close at all for some of them. For some of these new games that come out, comparing a Switch version to an Xbox Series X or a PS5 version, it would just be, I guess, a completely different looking and playing game. So that's what they're talking about here when they're considering the difference in the technical specifications. They say Microsoft and SAA offer non-portable consoles with similar technical specifications, and then Nintendo's flagship console, the Switch, offers a portable console for a lower price with significantly lower specifications. So there it is. I mean, he ends it off here saying that believes that the CMA made its determinations independently from the FTC's administrative decision. So lots of stuff here that I think is very telling, especially with a lot of the journalist stuff that came out after the EU, where they were making these articles talking about how Microsoft didn't take into account Nintendo. They were kind of painting this narrative that wasn't true, when the reality of the situation is, at the end of the day, the scenario that's been painted was from Sony's side. They brought this up. They didn't want to include Nintendo in these talks. They didn't want them to be considered as competition, whereas Microsoft pushed for them to be competition because it would be better for Microsoft if they considered Nintendo, because they signed that 10-year deal, and it would show that they are willing to work with the competition. So that's why they had the 80-20 thing. That's why they had this picture up and they left out Nintendo, because the regulators seemingly don't consider Nintendo within this argument for competition. It's all about PlayStation. It's all about Sony. It's all about trying to protect Sony in terms of them not being foreclosed. I mean, that's what they're saying. They're saying that they believe that they could be foreclosed if this merger happens, if it goes through. So that's what it's about. And that was just pretty insightful, good stuff there, talking about the documents within the CMA, which is the hearings are going to be this week, but we're going to have a similar thing here where they're going to have to show the market share between the two companies and probably try to present that PlayStation is far more dominant within the UK, and they'll probably leave out Nintendo in terms of the graphs that they show off, you would assume, because the CMA definitely is painting that picture as well. So that was interesting. And then there was this. Now, this is something that I think you can look at when it comes to Xbox and Activision and what the FTC may potentially do. And it has to do with Meta's acquisition of Within. They say the FTC drops bid to block Meta's acquisition of Within. The FTC has voted to drop its administrative case against Meta after a federal court denied its request for a preliminary injunction to block the acquisition. And we have Foss Patents here who says that this is going to happen with the Xbox Activision Blizzard merger. Says this, see below, will also happen in the Microsoft Activision Blizzard case. The questions are only, one, when the FTC's case will be dismissed, and two, whether there will be an agreement on remedies. Normally there will be. I doubt that the August trial will actually go forward. And if we take a look here at the actual timeline, that would be past May, but we have the response hearing from the CMA coming up this week, which lots of interesting stuff could come out of that. So lots of videos, lots of things to talk about. So stay tuned for that. And then you have the decision deadline for the EU, which is this part of April, beginning to mid-April. And then the decision deadline for the CMA, which is near the end of April, beginning of May timeline. I think it's April 30th. So after those decisions are made, I have a feeling that there's going to be something that the FTC makes a decision on. The earliest closing date, they may have to go to court in August if they decide to pursue that. But let's say decisions get made by the EU, by the CMA, they pass the deal. Maybe there are remedies in there. For example, putting Call of Duty on every single platform. FTC will probably look at that and then approve the deal going forward. So this is going to be the biggest thing here this week with the response hearings from the CMA, and we'll see how all of that works out. But I just wanted to go over this stuff because I thought it was pretty interesting, especially this thread here from Derek Strickland from Tweakdown about why Microsoft is using only PlayStation to paint the picture of the market. It's not up to Microsoft. If they had it their way, it sounds like they would want Nintendo in there. They would want to graph with Nintendo to show that Nintendo has a huge market share too, and we're willing to give Call of Duty to them. But I'm gonna leave that there, guys. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know your thoughts on everything that's going on with the Activision Blizzard merger, and what your thoughts are on this poster and then the actual timeline. What are you expecting to see this week with the CMA hearings? If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button. If you're new here, hit that subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.